"You are holding me back," Ethan said coldly, his voice sharper than the rain hitting the pavement. "And I am done pretending you belong in my world." The words did not just land. They cut, slicing through Olivia Carter as she stood frozen outside the glowing entrance of a luxury restaurant on Fifth Avenue. Her thin coat soaked through, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the quiet, devastating realization that the man she had loved for 3 years was already walking away without looking back. Inside the glass doors, warm golden light wrapped around crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, and Ethan did not hesitate as he stepped into that world beside Vanessa Cole, a woman draped in silk and diamonds, her laughter echoing as if Olivia had never existed. A black luxury car pulled up to the curb, its engine humming softly, and within seconds Ethan was inside it, the door shutting with a final, muted click that felt louder than thunder in Olivia's chest. The city moved on around her, taxis passing, strangers brushing by, neon lights flickering against wet asphalt. But for Olivia, time seemed to collapse into a single, suffocating moment. She tightened her grip on the worn leather bag at her side, the one Ethan used to tease her about, calling it cheap, calling it temporary, just like her place in his life. But he never knew the truth. He never asked. And now he never would. Before continuing, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Olivia exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cold night air, and for a brief second, her hand slipped into her coat pocket where her fingers brushed against something smooth and familiar. A card. Black. Heavy. Untouched. She did not pull it out. Not yet. Across the street, the reflection of the restaurant shimmered in a rain puddle, distorted but still bright, like a life she had chosen not to live. A life she had hidden from the man who just left her. A life tied to a name that could open every door Ethan had ever dreamed of. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand, breaking the silence. She looked down at the screen, her expression unreadable as the rain continued to fall, washing away nothing, revealing everything. And somewhere, far above the city, in a glass tower bearing a name Ethan would soon come to worship, a boardroom full of powerful people was waiting for someone who had just been told she was not enough. The rain did not stop when Olivia finally began to walk. It followed her like a quiet witness, soaking the edges of her coat and dripping from her hair as she moved down the block without direction, without urgency, as if the city itself had erased her destination the moment Ethan chose someone else. The glow of storefront windows passed across her face in shifting reflections, each one showing a different version of her, none of them matching the truth she had buried for so long. She turned a corner and stepped into a small convenience store, the bell above the door ringing softly, the warmth inside wrapping around her like a memory she did not fully trust. The cashier barely looked up as she walked past, her shoes leaving faint wet prints on the tiled floor, her hand still curled around her phone. It buzzed again. She stared at the screen longer this time. The name displayed there was not saved under anything simple. It was formal, distant. Carter Executive Office. Her thumb hovered above the answer button, hesitation flickering across her face, not from fear, but from something deeper, something heavier. For years, she had ignored calls like this, choosing a life that felt real instead of one that felt inherited. She had chosen Ethan. She had chosen ordinary. And tonight, ordinary had chosen to leave her behind. The call stopped. Silence returned for exactly one breath before it rang again. This time, she answered. Her voice was steady, but softer than usual. "Hello." A calm, practiced voice responded on the other end, respectful but firm. "Miss Carter, the board has been waiting for you. There is a matter that requires your immediate attention." Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment, her lashes still damp from the rain, as if bracing herself against a version of her life she could no longer postpone. "I told you before," she said quietly, "I am not ready." There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "With respect, Miss Carter, the situation has changed. Your presence is no longer optional." Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the glass window, illuminating Olivia Ware. She stood caught between two worlds. Her reflection in the freezer door behind her showed a woman who looked small, almost fragile, but the name echoing in her ears belonged to someone else entirely. Someone powerful, someone expected, someone Ethan had just dismissed without ever understanding who she truly was. "What happened?" she asked, her voice lower now, sharper. The answer came carefully. "There have been developments regarding the Carter global leadership structure. We need you here in the morning." Olivia's grip tightened around the phone, her knuckles pale, the weight of those words settling into her chest with a quiet finality. Morning. Not next week. Not someday. Morning meant there was no more space to hide. No more time to pretend. The life she had been avoiding was no longer waiting politely in the background. It was pulling her forward. She glanced down at her bag, at the worn edges, the scratches, the years of choosing less when she had always had more. Ethan had seen this and decided it defined her. He had measured her worth by what she refused to show. And now, for the first time, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, something certain. "I will be there," she said. The words felt unfamiliar, but right. The voice on the other end softened slightly. "We will prepare everything for your arrival, Miss Carter." The call ended. Olivia stood there for a moment longer, the quiet hum of the refrigerators filling the space around her, before she reached in her pocket and finally pulled out the black card. It caught the light in a way nothing else in the room did. Subtle, but undeniable, like power that did not need to announce itself. She looked at it, then at her reflection again, and this time, the two versions of herself did not feel separate. They felt inevitable. Outside, the rain began to slow, the drops lighter now, as if the storm had already done its job. Olivia pushed open the door and stepped back into the night, but her pace had changed. There was direction now. There was purpose. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was stepping into a life he believed was his future, unaware that the woman he had just left behind was about to walk into a world that would redefine everything he thought he understood about power, about wealth, and about who truly belonged. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale light slipping through the tall glass windows of a city that never truly slept. And for Olivia Carter, it felt less like a new beginning and more like the quiet end of something she had held onto for far too long. The car that picked her up was waiting exactly where the voice had promised it would be, sleek and black, engine running, a driver standing beside it with a posture that suggested discipline rather than service. He opened the door without asking questions, without needing confirmation, because in his world, names like hers were not questioned, they were recognized. Olivia hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The leather seat cool against her skin, the scent of polished wood and quiet wealth surrounding her in a way that felt both familiar and distant, like returning to a place she had once escaped. As the car moved through the streets of Manhattan, the city shifted outside the window, from crowded sidewalks and corner stores to wide avenues lined with glass towers that reflected the sky like mirrors. Olivia watched it all in silence, her reflection faintly visible against the tinted glass, her expression no longer uncertain but not yet fully resolved. She thought about the years she had spent building a life that required nothing from anyone, a life where her name meant nothing more than what she allowed people to see. Ethan had loved that version of her, or at least he had believed he did, until it no longer served his ambition. The car slowed as it approached a towering building that dominated the skyline, its presence impossible to ignore even among the other giants surrounding it. The name etched across the front in clean, understated lettering read Carter Global, a name that carried weight in boardrooms, in markets, in conversations that shaped industries. Olivia's gaze lingered on it, not with awe, but with recognition. This was never something she discovered. It was something she had always been born into. Inside, the lobby stretched upward with marble floors that reflected the morning light, security personnel standing at precise intervals, their attention sharp but controlled. Conversations quieted as she stepped through the entrance, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to signal that something had shifted. A woman in a tailored suit approached her immediately, her expression composed, her tone respectful. "Miss Carter, welcome back." Everything is ready upstairs. Olivia nodded once, her movements calm, measured, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, even if it had been years since she last walked these halls. The elevator ride was silent, smooth, the numbers rising steadily, each floor bringing her closer to a version of herself she had chosen to leave behind. When the doors opened, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, more focused, as if decisions made here carried consequences far beyond the walls of the room. The boardroom doors stood closed at the end of the corridor, and just outside them, a man waited. Daniel Hayes. He stood with the kind of stillness that came from confidence rather than control, his posture relaxed but deliberate, his eyes lifting as Olivia approached. There was no surprise in his expression, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if he had been expecting not just her arrival, but her decision. "You came," he said, his voice calm, steady, not impressed, not intimidated. Olivia met his gaze, searching for something in it, perhaps judgment, perhaps curiosity, but what she found instead was something simpler. "Clarity. I said I would," she replied, her voice even. Daniel gave a slight nod, stepping aside to gesture toward the doors. "They have been waiting for you." Olivia paused for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering near the handle, the weight of everything she had avoided pressing against this single moment. Then she pushed the doors open. Conversations inside stopped immediately. A long table filled the center of the room, men and women in tailored suits turning toward her, their expressions shifting from expectation to recognition. Olivia Carter had not just arrived. She had returned, and in that silence, in that collective understanding, something became undeniable. The woman Ethan had left standing in the rain was not the one stepping into this room. And somewhere in the city, unaware of the shift already in motion, he was still chasing a future that no longer belonged to him. The doors closed behind Olivia with a soft, final sound that seemed to seal the moment in place. And for a brief second, no one in the boardroom spoke, as if the air itself had paused to acknowledge her presence. Then, slowly, one by one, the members of the board rose from their seats, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, their movements deliberate, respectful, signaling a shift in authority that required no explanation. At the head of the table, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes inclined his head slightly. "Miss Carter, we appreciate your return." Olivia walked forward with measured steps, her posture straight, her expression calm, every trace of the uncertainty from the night before replaced by something quieter but far more powerful. Control. She did not rush to respond. Instead, she took her seat at the center of the table, the chair that had remained empty for years, waiting for someone who had chosen not to claim it until now. "You said the situation has changed," she began, her voice steady, carrying across the room without strain. "I want to hear everything." A screen at the far end of the room flickered to life, numbers and reports appearing in clean, precise lines, but Olivia's attention remained on the people, not the data. She read their faces, their posture, the tension hidden beneath professionalism, and she understood immediately that this was not just about business. It was about control. It was about succession. It was about who would lead Carter Global into its next chapter. The silver-haired man spoke again, his tone careful. "There have been attempts from external investors to influence the board's direction. They are pushing for a leadership restructuring." Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly, not in surprise, but in calculation. "And they believe I will not intervene," she said quietly. A few exchanged glances confirmed it. For years, her absence had been interpreted as disinterest, as weakness, as an opportunity. But that assumption had just become their mistake. Olivia leaned back slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the table, her gaze steady. "That will not happen." The room stilled again, but this time, the silence carried something different. Alignment. Outside the building, the city continued its relentless rhythm, unaware that inside this room, a decision had just been made that would ripple far beyond these walls. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Blake sat in a private lounge high above the city, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, his reflection staring back at him from the dark window beside him. Vanessa Cole stood near the balcony, her silhouette framed by the skyline, her voice light but calculated as she spoke about opportunities, about connections, about how quickly things could change when you aligned yourself with the right people. Ethan listened, nodding at the right moments, his confidence growing with every word, convinced that he had finally stepped into the life he deserved. "You made the right choice," Vanessa said with a small smile, turning toward him. "Some people are just not built for this world." Ethan exhaled slowly, a faint smirk forming as he thought back to Olivia standing in the rain, quiet, small, insignificant. "Yeah," he said under his breath, more to himself than to her. "She never belonged here." Back in the boardroom, Olivia rose from her seat, the movement smooth, decisive, drawing every eye toward her once more. "Schedule a full board review," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I want every investor proposal, every contract, every point of pressure laid out in front of me by the end of the day." Her gaze shifted slightly, landing on Daniel Hayes, who had remained silent near the far side of the room, observing rather than speaking. "And I want an internal assessment of who is aligned with this company and who is not." Daniel met her gaze without hesitation, a faint nod acknowledging both the request and the authority behind it. "It will be done." Olivia held his gaze for a moment longer, as if measuring something unspoken, then turned back toward the room. The meeting continued, but the tone had changed. There was no longer uncertainty. There was direction. And as decisions began to take shape, one truth became impossible to ignore. Olivia Carter was no longer hiding, and the world she had stepped into was about to reveal itself in ways that would make the choices of the past impossible to escape. The rest of the day moved with a precision that left no room for hesitation, and Olivia Carter did not slow down once, not for a second, not for a breath that was not intentional. Reports were delivered, projections were reviewed, and names were quietly marked in her mind, not just as allies or risks, but as people who had underestimated her long before she ever stepped back into this building. By late afternoon, the glass walls of the executive floor reflected a different version of her than the one who had walked in that morning. The softness was still there, but it was no longer leading. It was controlled, directed, refined into something sharper. Daniel Hayes remained a constant presence throughout the day, never intrusive, never overbearing, but always exactly where he needed to be, offering insight when necessary and silence when it mattered more. At one point, as the last of the board members filed out of strategy session, Olivia paused near the window overlooking the city, her arms loosely crossed as she studied the movement far below. "You did not have to come back like this," Daniel said from a few steps behind her, his voice calm, observant rather than critical. "Most people would have taken more time." Olivia did not turn immediately. "Time is exactly what they thought I needed," she replied, her tone even. "And time is what they were counting on." She finally glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression unreadable but steady. "I am not here to ease them into this. I am here to remind them who built this company." Daniel held her gaze for a moment, something like approval flickering in his eyes before it disappeared behind professionalism. "Understood." The sun had already begun to set by the time Olivia stepped out of the building, the sky painted in muted shades of gold and gray, the city lights slowly waking beneath it. The car was waiting again, just as it had that morning, but this time Olivia did not hesitate. She slid into the back seat with quiet confidence, her mind already shifting from reaction to intention. There was one more thing she needed to do. Across town, the atmosphere inside an upscale rooftop restaurant was filled with low music and the soft murmur of conversation. The kind of place where deals were made between courses and ambition was dressed in tailored suits. Ethan Blake sat at a table near the edge, the skyline stretching out behind him like a promise he believed he had finally earned. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her voice smooth as she spoke about introductions, about investors, about how quickly doors could open when you knew the right people. Ethan listened, his posture relaxed, his confidence growing with every word, unaware that the very world he was trying to enter was already shifting beyond his reach. A server approached, placing a bottle of wine on the table, the label expensive enough to signal status without needing explanation. Ethan glanced at it with quiet satisfaction, a small confirmation that he was moving in the right direction. Then, just as he reached for his glass, the energy in the room changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in attention, a ripple of movement near the entrance, but it spread quickly, conversation softening, heads turning, curiosity building into something more focused. Ethan frowned slightly, his gaze following the direction of the room, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to confusion as he tried to see what had drawn everyone's attention. Vanessa turned as well, her posture straightening instinctively, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if calculating the importance of whoever had just arrived. The doors opened, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow. Olivia stepped inside, her presence quiet but undeniable, dressed not in excess, but in something far more dangerous. Certainty. The room did not erupt into noise. It fell into a kind of respectful silence that carried more weight than applause ever could. People did not need to be told who she was. They recognized it. They felt it. Ethan's hand froze around his glass, his breath catching in his throat as his eyes locked onto her. Disbelief flickering across his face as recognition struggled to catch up with reality. Vanessa's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, her composure cracking for just a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. Olivia's gaze moved across the room slowly, deliberately, not searching, not hesitant, but aware. And when her eyes finally landed on Ethan, there was no anger in them. No sadness. Only something far more unsettling. Understanding. The kind that comes too late for the person who needed it first. The silence in the room did not break when Olivia stepped further inside. It deepened, stretching into something heavier, something that pressed against every person present with quiet authority. She did not rush, did not acknowledge the whispers beginning to rise beneath the surface, her heels moving across the polished floor with a steady rhythm that felt almost deliberate, as if every step was meant to remind the room exactly who had entered it. Ethan's grip on his glass tightened, the faint clink of crystal against his ring the only sound he seemed capable of making, his mind struggling to reconcile the image in front of him with the memory he had discarded just the night before. This was not the girl standing in the rain. This was someone else entirely. Olivia stopped near the center of the room, not directly at Ethan's table, not yet, allowing the weight of recognition to settle before she chose where to focus her attention. A man in a tailored suit approached her first, his posture respectful, his voice low but clear. "Miss Carter, we were not expecting you this evening." Olivia turned her gaze toward him, offering a small, controlled nod. "I did not plan to attend," she said calmly. "But plans change." The man smiled politely, stepping aside as if instinctively making space for her presence. And that simple movement was enough to confirm what many in the room were already beginning to understand. Ethan's chair scraped slightly against the floor as he stood, unable to remain seated any longer, his eyes fixed on her, searching for something that could explain what he was seeing. "Olivia," he said, her name leaving his mouth with uncertainty, as if speaking it might somehow correct the reality in front of him. For the first time since entering the room, Olivia turned fully toward him. She held his gaze, not with warmth, not with hostility, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. Ethan. His name sounded different coming from her now, stripped of familiarity, measured, almost distant. Vanessa rose more slowly, her expression composed but sharper now, her instincts already shifting into calculation. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she said smoothly, extending her hand with practiced confidence. "Vanessa Cole." Olivia glanced at the offered hand for a brief moment before meeting Vanessa's eyes instead, her own expression unchanged. "I know who you are," she replied, her voice polite but firm, not dismissive but not inviting either. The hand remained suspended for a second longer before Vanessa lowered it, the smallest fracture in her composure appearing and disappearing just as quickly. Ethan took a step forward, his confusion giving way to something closer to urgency. "Olivia, what is going on?" he asked, his voice lower now, as if trying to contain the attention gathering around them. "You were just—" He hesitated, the memory of her in the rain clashing violently with the reality of her standing here, composed, recognized, unquestioned. "You are not part of this world." Olivia tilted her head slightly, not in offense, but in quiet acknowledgement of what he had just revealed about himself. "No," she said softly. "I was not part of the world you understood." The distinction landed harder than any accusation could have. Around them, the room listened without pretending not to, the subtle shift of bodies and glances forming an invisible circle that centered on the three of them. Ethan swallowed, his confidence slipping, replaced by the first signs of doubt. "Olivia, if this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can talk about this somewhere else," he said quickly, his tone shifting toward something almost familiar, almost pleading. Olivia's gaze did not waver. "There is no misunderstanding," she replied. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Vanessa, then back to Ethan, the movement small but intentional. "You made a decision based on what you thought I was worth. Now you're seeing what you never took the time to understand." Vanessa's expression hardened slightly, her voice cutting in with controlled sharpness. "Ethan does not owe anyone an explanation for choosing the life he wants," she said, her tone defensive but polished. Olivia met her gaze again, this time holding it just long enough to make the point without raising her voice. "You are right," she said. "He does not owe me anything." The words seemed to ease something in Ethan's posture for a fraction of a second, until Olivia continued. "But choices come with consequences, and not all of them are immediate." The meaning settled slowly, deliberately, leaving no space for denial. In the distance, someone whispered her name again, louder this time, the recognition spreading through the room like a quiet current. "Carter." The name did not need to be explained. It carried its own weight. Ethan's face drained of color as the realization finally began to take shape. Not fully, not completely, but enough to make his certainty crumble. Olivia Carter. The woman he had left behind was not just someone he had underestimated. She was someone he had never truly seen at all. The name did not fade once it was spoken. It spread, carried from one table to another in low voices that grew less careful with each passing second, until the room was no longer pretending not to watch. Carter. The weight of it settled over everything, pressing into Ethan's chest with a force he could not ignore, his mind racing backward through every moment, every word he had said, every assumption he had made, all of it rearranging itself into something far more dangerous than a mistake. Olivia Carter. The Heir. The name he had chased in articles, in conversations, in whispered deals he hoped to one day be part of. And he had just walked away from her as if she were nothing. Ethan took another step forward, his voice lowering, urgency replacing confidence completely. "Olivia," he said again, but this time her name sounded unfamiliar even to him, like he was trying to claim something that had already slipped out of his reach. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, the question coming out sharper than he intended, edged with confusion, frustration, and something closer to panic. Olivia's expression did not change. She studied him for a moment, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet clarity that made his question feel smaller the longer it lingered in the air. "Because you never asked," she said simply. The answer landed harder than any explanation could have. Ethan opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came, because somewhere beneath the shock, he knew it was true. He had never been curious about her beyond what she could offer him in the version of life he wanted. Vanessa shifted beside him, her posture tightening as the situation slipped further out of her control, her eyes flicking between Olivia and the growing attention around them. "This does not change anything," she said, her tone controlled but colder now, as if trying to re-establish ground that was already gone. "People are impressed by names, but what matters is what you build, what you choose." Olivia turned her gaze toward her again, this time with something faintly sharper beneath the calm. "You are right," she said. "It is about what you choose." Her eyes moved back to Ethan, holding him there in a way that made it impossible for him to look away. and you already made your choice. The words did not rise, did not accuse, but they closed something with finality. Around them, the room continued to watch, but now the energy had shifted from curiosity to understanding. This was not just an introduction. This was a reversal, a quiet, undeniable shift in power that no one needed explained. Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly, the realization settling deeper, heavier, his voice losing the last traces of certainty. "Olivia, I did not know," he said, softer now, almost searching for something in her expression that might still resemble the woman he thought he understood. Olivia took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to acknowledge the moment for what it was. "That is exactly the point," she replied. "You did not know me." The distinction was clear, deliberate, and irreversible. Vanessa's composure cracked just enough to reveal the calculation beneath it, her voice lowering as she leaned closer to Ethan. "We should leave," she murmured, her tone urgent now, no longer concerned with appearances but with control. "This is not worth getting involved in." But Ethan did not move. He could not. His eyes remained locked on Olivia, as if stepping away now would mean accepting something he was not ready to face. Across the room, Daniel Hayes had stepped inside without drawing attention, his presence quiet but observant, his gaze moving between Olivia and Ethan with a level of understanding that suggested he saw more than what was being said. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. Olivia straightened slightly, her posture shifting in a way that signaled the conversation was ending, not because she was dismissed, but because she had decided it was over. She looked at Ethan one last time, not with regret, not with anger, but with something far more final. "You did not lose me," she said, her voice calm, steady, impossible to misinterpret. "You never saw me." The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, the truth was no longer something Ethan could question. It was something he had to live with. And as Olivia turned away, her attention already shifting beyond him, it became painfully clear that whatever place he thought he had in her life no longer existed, not because she had taken it away, but because it had never truly been there at all. Olivia did not look back as she walked away, the quiet echo of her footsteps blending into the low hum of the room as conversations slowly began to rise again, softer at first, then more certain, as if everyone present needed to reorient themselves around what had just happened. The air felt different now, charged with something unspoken, something that lingered long after the moment itself had passed. "Daniel." Hayes stepped forward from the edge of the room, his presence aligning naturally with Olivia's pace as if he had always been meant to stand beside her, not ahead, not behind, but exactly there. He did not speak immediately, allowing the silence between them to settle into something steady rather than empty. "You handled that with restraint," he said finally, his tone even, not offering praise, but acknowledging control. Olivia continued walking, her gaze forward, her expression calm but thoughtful. "It was not about restraint," she replied. "It was about clarity." Daniel glanced at her briefly, understanding more in that single word than most would have in a full explanation. Outside, the evening air carried a faint chill, the city alive with movement, headlights streaking along the streets below as the night deepened. The car was already waiting, but Olivia paused before stepping in, her attention drawn to the skyline stretching out before her, the reflection of the city lights dancing in her eyes. For a long time, she had avoided this world, not because she feared it, but because she did not want to become someone shaped by it. And yet now, standing at the edge of it, she understood something she had not allowed herself to before. Power was not what defined a person, but it revealed them. Daniel stood beside her, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his gaze following hers toward the city. "You're not obligated to prove anything to anyone," he said quietly. Olivia turned slightly toward him, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge the intent behind his words. "I know," she said, "but this was never about proving something to them." Her gaze shifted back toward the horizon, her voice lowering slightly. "It was about understanding something for myself." Daniel nodded once, accepting that answer without pressing further. He opened the car door for her, a small gesture, not performative, not expected, but intentional. Olivia stepped inside, and this time, the movement felt different. Not like returning, like claiming. Across the city, the atmosphere in the rooftop restaurant had not recovered. Ethan remained standing long after Olivia had left, his mind replaying every second, every word, each one cutting deeper now that he understood what they meant. Vanessa's patience had worn thin, her voice sharper as she stepped closer to him. "We are leaving," she said, no longer masking the irritation. Beneath her tone, "This situation is already attracting attention we do not need." Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the space where Olivia had stood, as if expecting her to reappear and undo what had just happened. "You knew," he said suddenly, his voice low, his gaze shifting toward Vanessa. Her expression hardened. "I knew what?" she replied, her tone defensive but controlled. About her, Ethan continued, the realization forming as he spoke it. About who she is. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment too long, and in that silence, the answer became clear. "I knew enough," she admitted finally. "Not everything, but enough to understand that she was not someone you should underestimate." Ethan let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and disbelief, shaking his head slightly. "And you did not think to tell me." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "It was not my place to educate you," she said. "You made your own judgments." The words echoed in his mind, uncomfortably familiar, reflecting something Olivia had already made clear. Ethan stepped back slightly, the distance between them growing not physically, but in something less visible, something more final. For the first time that evening, the confidence he had carried into this room was gone completely, replaced by something heavier. Regret was too simple a word for it. It was realization, and it was only beginning. Back in the car, Olivia leaned her head back slightly against the seat, her eyes closing for just a moment, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of transition. When she opened them again, the city looked different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. And somewhere within that shift, something new had begun to take shape. Not revenge, not even justice. Something quieter, something stronger. A future that no longer depended on who chose to stay, but on who she chose to become. The night did not end with that confrontation. It carried forward, stretching into the early hours of the next day, where decisions were no longer emotional but strategic, where consequences began to take shape in ways that could not be undone. By the time the sun rose again over Manhattan, Carter Global was already moving. Olivia stood at the head of the boardroom once more, the morning light cutting through the glass walls behind her, casting long reflections across the table, where every seat was now filled, every attention fixed on her without distraction. The atmosphere was different from the day before. There was no uncertainty left, only anticipation. Daniel Hayes stood slightly to her right, a series of documents laid out in precise order, each one representing a thread of influence, a point of pressure, a hidden move that had been building while Olivia had been away. Olivia did not sit this time. She remained standing, her posture straight, her presence anchoring the room. "Begin," she said simply. Daniel nodded once and activated the screen. Names appeared. Investment groups, shell partnerships, silent stakeholders who had positioned themselves carefully, quietly, believing no one was paying attention. Until now, these entities have been coordinating efforts to shift controlling interest through indirect channels, Daniel explained, his voice calm but firm. Several internal members of this board have supported these movements. A ripple moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. Olivia's gaze did not move to the screen. It moved to the people. She watched reactions. The hesitation in one man's posture, the tension in another's hands, the silence of those who suddenly avoided eye contact. Then she spoke. "If you aligned yourselves with outside interests under the assumption that I would not return, you made a calculation," she said, her tone even controlled. "Now you will live with the outcome of that calculation." One of the board members shifted in his seat, clearing his throat as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Miss Carter," With all respect, these decisions were made in the interest of growth and stability. Olivia turned toward him fully, her gaze steady, unshaken. Growth that requires secrecy is not stability, she replied. It is risk, and you chose to place this company at risk without authority. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was not respect alone that held it together. It was accountability. Olivia gestured slightly toward Daniel. Proceed. Daniel continued, outlining contracts, connections, financial flows that revealed not just ambition, but intent. By the end of the presentation, the truth was no longer something that could be softened or reinterpreted. It was clear, direct, and irreversible. Olivia took a slow breath, then spoke again, her voice carrying a quiet finality. Effective immediately, all board members involved in these actions will be removed pending legal review. There were no raised voices, no arguments, because everyone in the room understood something essential. This was not a negotiation. This was a correction. Across the city, Ethan Blake sat alone in his apartment, the skyline outside his window no longer feeling like a promise, but like something distant, unreachable. His phone lay on the table in front of him, screen lit, an article open that he had read at least 5 times and still did not fully process. Carter Global announces immediate leadership reaffirmation. The headline was simple. The image beneath it was not. Olivia stood at the center of a press briefing, composed, undeniable, her presence commanding in a way that no photograph could fully capture, but still managed to suggest. Ethan leaned back slowly, running a hand through his hair, his mind struggling to reconcile the timeline. Last night, she had been standing in the rain. This morning, she was reclaiming an empire, and he had never seen it. His phone buzzed. A message for Vanessa. We need to talk. He stared at it for a moment before setting the phone face down, the weight of everything settling deeper, heavier, more permanent. Back in the boardroom, Olivia stepped away from the table, the decisions already in motion, the consequences already unfolding. Daniel joined her near the window, his expression thoughtful but steady. That will send a clear message, he said. Olivia looked out over the city, her reflection faint against the glass, her voice quiet but certain. It is not about the message. It is about the truth being visible. Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. And now it is. Olivia did not respond immediately. Her gaze moved across the skyline, across the buildings, across the lives unfolding within them, including one that had just shifted beyond recognition. Because somewhere out there, Ethan Blake was beginning to understand something he could not undo. Not just that he had made the wrong choice, but that he had never understood the value of what he had already been given until it was far too late. The fallout did not wait for permission. It arrived swiftly, quietly, and with a precision that left no space for denial. By midday, the financial press had already picked up the shift at Carter Global, headlines spreading across screens and conversations alike, each one reinforcing the same undeniable truth. Olivia Carter was not just back. She was in control. Inside her office, the atmosphere remained calm, almost deceptively so, as if the storm that had just passed had never existed. But beneath that calm, everything was moving. Assistants stepped in and out with updates. Legal teams coordinated behind closed doors, and calls came in from partners who suddenly remembered their loyalty. Olivia stood near her desk, reviewing a document without urgency, her focus sharp but unforced, as if she had always belonged in this exact moment. Daniel entered without knocking, closing the door quietly behind him, a tablet in his hand. There is something you should see, he said, his tone measured. Olivia looked up, her expression attentive but not concerned. Daniel placed the tablet on the desk, turning it slightly toward her. A video was playing. It was from the night before. The rooftop restaurant. The confrontation. Not the entire moment, but enough. Enough to show Ethan's confusion. Enough to show Vanessa's hesitation. Enough to show Olivia standing in the center of it all, composed, unmistakable. Olivia watched it without reacting, her gaze steady as the clip ended. It is already circulating, Daniel added. It will reach every major outlet within hours. Olivia set the tablet down gently, her fingers resting against the edge for a brief moment before she spoke. "Let it," she said calmly. Daniel studied her for a second, then nodded. "It will change how people approach you." Olivia's expression softened just slightly, not with concern, but with understanding. "They were always going to approach me differently," she replied. "Now they just know why." Across the city, Ethan Blake was learning that truth the hard way. His phone had not stopped ringing since morning, but the calls were not what they used to be. They were not invitations. They were not opportunities. They were questions, concerned, cautious, and in some cases, quietly distancing. A colleague he had spoken to just days ago now sounded hesitant, measured, as if every word needed to be chosen carefully. Another call went unanswered entirely. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the untouched coffee in front of him growing cold, his reflection faint in the dark screen of his phone. The article was still open, the image of Olivia staring back at him with a presence he could not ignore. He replayed the video again, his finger tapping the screen with a kind of disbelief that had not faded. The moment where she said his name, the way she looked at him, not angry, not hurt, just clear. That was the part he could not escape. His phone buzzed again. "Vanessa." He hesitated longer this time before answering. Her voice came through sharp, controlled, but strained beneath the surface. "We need to talk about what happened last night," she said. Ethan let out a slow breath, his hand tightening slightly around the phone. "There's nothing to talk about," he replied quietly. There was a pause on the other end, shorter this time, less controlled. "That is not how this works," Vanessa said, her tone shifting, frustration breaking through. "Everything we planned, everything we were building, this affects all of it." Ethan stared at the table, his mind no longer following her words the way it had before. For the first time, they sounded distant, irrelevant. "What exactly were we building, Vanessa?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Another pause. Longer. He could almost hear her recalculating. "Opportunity," she said finally. "Position. Access." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, the weight of that answer settling into something heavier than disappointment. "And you think that is enough?" he said. Vanessa's voice sharpened again. "Is more than most people ever get." Ethan opened his eyes, looking again at the image of Olivia on his screen, the quiet certainty in her expression, the way she had stood without needing to prove anything. "No," he said softly. "It is not." The call ended soon after, not with resolution, but with distance, a separation that neither of them could bridge anymore. Back at Carter Global, Olivia stepped away from her desk, moving toward the window once more, the city stretching out before her, unchanged yet completely different. Daniel joined her again, his presence steady as ever. "This will draw him back," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. Olivia did not look away from the skyline. "Maybe," she replied. Her voice was calm, unaffected. "But whether he comes back or not is no longer the question." Daniel glanced at her, understanding the shift immediately. "Then what is?" he asked. Olivia's reflection in the glass met her own gaze, her expression quiet but certain. "Who I choose to let stand beside me now," she said. And for the first time since the storm began, the future did not feel like something uncertain. It felt like something entirely her own. The city moved forward, but for Ethan Blake, time seemed to hesitate, caught somewhere between what had been and what could never be again. By the next morning, the distance between him and the world he thought he was entering had become unmistakable. Messages that once came easily had slowed, then stopped. Invitations that had felt within reach were now redirected, postponed, or quietly withdrawn. Even the tone of the people around him had shifted, subtle but undeniable, as if an invisible line had been drawn and he had unknowingly stepped to the wrong side of it. He stood outside Carter Global, the towering building rising above him like a statement he could no longer ignore, his reflection faint against the glass doors as he tried to steady his thoughts. This was the place he had wanted to be part of, the world he had believed required a certain kind of person, a certain kind of partner, a certain kind of choice. And now he understood that he had been standing beside it all along without ever realizing it. Inside, the lobby was calm, controlled, the quiet movement of professionals carrying on without interruption. But Ethan felt the difference immediately as he stepped in, as if the space itself recognized that he did not belong here in the same way he once imagined. A receptionist looked up, her expression polite but measured. "Can I help you?" Ethan hesitated for a brief second before answering. "I am here to see Olivia Carter," he said, the name feeling heavier now, more deliberate. The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition, not of him, but of the name he had just spoken. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. The question was simple, but it landed with more weight than he expected. "No," he admitted. "I just need a few minutes." The receptionist offered a small, professional smile. "I am sorry, but Miss Carter's schedule is full today. You can leave a message with her assistant." Ethan nodded slowly, the rejection not harsh, not dramatic, but absolute in its simplicity. He stepped aside, moving toward the seating area, his gaze drifting across the lobby as he tried to gather what he would say if he did get the chance. Around him, people moved with purpose, conversations low but confident, every detail reinforcing something he could know. Longer deny. This world did not bend for uncertainty. It responded to clarity, and he had lacked it when it mattered most. Upstairs, Olivia stood in a conference room overlooking the city, reviewing a proposal with a small group of executives, her attention focused, her decisions precise. Daniel stood beside her, occasionally adding insight, but mostly observing the way she navigated the discussion, the way she listened before speaking, the way she made each conclusion feel inevitable rather than imposed. When the meeting ended, the room cleared quickly, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet space. Daniel glanced toward her, a slight shift in his posture, signaling something beyond business. "He is downstairs," he said. Olivia did not react immediately. She set the document in her hand down carefully, aligning it with the others before finally looking up. "How long?" she asked. "Long enough to be certain he is not leaving," Daniel replied. There was no judgment in his tone, only information. Olivia walked toward the window, her gaze moving across the city as if searching for something within it, or perhaps confirming something she already knew. "People often return when they finally understand what they lost," she said quietly. Daniel watched her for a moment, then asked the question that mattered. "Do you want to see him?" Olivia remained silent for a few seconds, the weight of the moment settling not as hesitation, but as consideration. Then she turned back toward him, her expression calm, resolved. "No," she said. "Not today." The answer was not cold. It was not emotional. It was clear. Daniel nodded once, accepting it without question. "I will have security informed," he said. Olivia shook her head slightly. "That will not be necessary. Let him wait." The choice was deliberate, not as punishment, but as a reflection of something Ethan needed to understand. Time. The very thing he had not given her. Downstairs, Ethan sat in the quiet of the lobby, watching the elevator doors open and close, each movement carrying people who belonged, people who knew where they were going, people who had not hesitated when it mattered. Minutes passed, then more. His phone remained silent. No message, no call, no interruption, just the steady realization that for the first time, he was the one waiting without certainty, without control, without the assurance that he would be chosen. And somewhere above him, separated by floors and decisions he could no longer influence, Olivia Carter continued forward, not looking back, not because she could not, but because she had already decided she did not need to. Time did not rush for Ethan. It stretched, slow and heavy, each passing minute in the Carter global lobby, settling deeper into something he could not escape. The polished floors reflected movement around him, professionals walking with purpose, voices low, decisions being made in spaces he could no longer access. And yet he remained seated, unmoving, as if leaving would mean accepting a truth he was still trying to resist. He checked his phone again, though he already knew there was nothing new. No message from Olivia. No acknowledgement. Just silence. The kind that forces you to hear your own thoughts more clearly than you want to. Hours passed. The light in the lobby shifted from bright morning clarity to the softer tone of afternoon, and still, no one came for him. Eventually, the receptionist approached again, her tone gentle but firm. "Sir, if you do not have an appointment, I will need to ask you to leave." Ethan looked up at her, the words landing differently now than they would have before, not as an inconvenience, but as a reflection of where he stood. He nodded slowly, rising from his seat, his movements quieter, heavier. As he turned toward the exit, he glanced once more toward the elevators, a final, instinctive hope that something might change at the last second. It did not. The doors remained closed. The space remained unchanged. And Olivia did not come. Outside, the city felt louder than before, the noise of traffic and conversation pressing in around him as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the glass building behind him reflecting a version of himself he no longer recognized. For the first time, there was no next move, no plan, no clear direction forward, just the undeniable understanding that the opportunity he thought he could return to was never waiting for him in the first place. Above him, in a quiet conference room overlooking the same city, Olivia stood beside the window, her reflection merging with the skyline beyond it, her expression calm but thoughtful. She had not asked for updates. She had not needed them. The silence below had told her everything she needed to know. Daniel entered the room without urgency, closing the door softly behind him, his presence steady as always. "He left," he said. Olivia did not turn immediately. She watched the city for a moment longer before responding. "Of course he did," she replied quietly. There was no satisfaction in her voice, no sense of victory, only clarity. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze resting on her reflection rather than her directly. "Most people would have taken the meeting," he said. Olivia allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile to touch her expression, not out of amusement, but recognition. "Most people would have needed it," she replied. The difference between those two things did not need to be explained. Daniel studied her for a moment, then shifted his focus slightly, his tone softer now, less about business and more about something unspoken. "And you," he asked, "what do you need?" The question lingered in the space between them, not demanding an answer, but offering one if she chose to give it. Olivia turned then, finally facing him fully, her eyes steady, clear, no longer divided between past and present. "I need to move forward without carrying something that was never truly mine," she said. Daniel held her gaze, understanding, settling quietly in his expression. "And are you ready to do that?" he asked. Olivia took a slow breath, the weight of the last 2 days shifting into something lighter, something resolved. "I already have," she said. The words did not feel like a declaration. They felt like a fact. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unchanged, unaware of the decisions that had just reshaped the direction of more than one life. Ethan walked down the street without looking back, his steps uncertain at first, then steadier as he moved further away from the building that had come to represent everything he had misunderstood. He did not know where he was going, but for the first time, he understood why. And above it all, Olivia Carter stood exactly where she was meant to be, not because she had taken something from someone else, but because she had finally stopped giving away parts of herself to people who had never taken the time to see her clearly in the first place. The city did not mark the moment when everything finally settled, but for Olivia Carter, the shift was undeniable, not loud, not dramatic, but complete. Weeks had passed since the night the truth revealed itself, and the world had adjusted in the only way it ever does, by moving forward, by reshaping itself around what could no longer be ignored. Carter Global stood stronger than before, its direction no longer questioned, its leadership no longer uncertain. Inside the top-floor office, sunlight stretched across the floor in long, quiet lines, and Olivia stood at the center of it, reviewing the final document of the morning with calm precision. The weight she once carried had changed, no longer something heavy pressing down, but something steady, something she controlled instead of something that defined her. Daniel Hayes stepped into the office, his presence as consistent as it had been since the day she returned, his tone relaxed but certain. "The board approved the final restructuring," he said. "It is done." Olivia set the document down, her fingers resting briefly against the surface before she looked up. Good, she replied, not with relief, but with completion. Daniel studied her for a moment, then allowed a small shift in his posture, something less formal, more personal. You built something stable out of something that was nearly broken, he said. That is not easy. Olivia held his gaze, her expression thoughtful but not distant. It was never broken, she said quietly. It was just waiting for the right decisions to be made. Daniel gave a slight nod, understanding that distinction more than most. Outside the window, the city moved as it always had, but inside, something had reached its natural conclusion. Across town, Ethan Blake stood in a much smaller office than the ones he once imagined for himself. The view limited, the noise of the street louder, closer, less filtered. His phone rested on the desk in front of him, silent now in a way that no longer felt temporary. The conversations had stopped. The opportunities had shifted elsewhere. And the world he once tried to step into had closed without hesitation. He looked down at a single message he had typed and deleted more than once. Olivia. He never sent it. Not because he did not want to, but because he finally understood something that had taken losing everything for him to see. There are moments you cannot return to, and people who do not wait for you to become someone better after you failed to see them the first time. He leaned back slowly, exhaling, not in frustration, but in acceptance. The lesson had come at a cost he could not undo. Back at Carter Global, Olivia stepped away from her desk and walked toward the window once more, the skyline stretching endlessly in front of her. Daniel joined her, standing beside her without interrupting the quiet. After a moment, he spoke, his voice softer now, less about business and more about something real. What happens next? He asked. Olivia did not answer immediately. She let the question settle, not as pressure, but as possibility. Then she turned slightly toward him, her expression clear, grounded, and finally at peace. Next, she said, I choose differently. Daniel held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, something built not on assumption, not on status, but on understanding. He offered a small nod, not pushing, not claiming, simply present. That is a good place to begin, he said. Olivia allowed a faint smile to form, the kind that does not need to prove anything, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you deserve. Outside, the city continued, unchanged, but for Olivia, everything had shifted into alignment. She was no longer the woman standing in the rain, waiting to be chosen. She was the one who chose. And this time, she would choose with clarity, with strength, and with the understanding that real value is never something you have to prove to someone who is never willing to see it in the first place.